Welcome back, guys, for the third match of this Sunday broadcast of the Victory Road World Cup, sponsored by the amazing Elgato. Sadly, we don't have Gimli joining us for this particular show, but we do have the amazing Gabby joining us for her first match of the broadcast. How are you doing, Gabby? Have you enjoyed the show so far?
I have, and I do miss Gimli, but I do understand that showbiz is hard and needing a break. So, thanks for taking care of him. Lou. I know that you're sort of his, I don't know, manager maybe to go along with the theme, but
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
I'm excited to see some really exciting Pokemon matches because this next one, I think have the highest stakes we've seen on the stream so far.
Yeah, definitely. The first two matches we broadcast, the winners of that particular country clash had already been decided. But in this one, the match is 3-3. So this is like going to be able to put the team in the advantage. Is going to be the decider.
Yeah, so Peru versus Singapore, Jean-Paul Lopez versus Brian So. It's been interesting to watch this match play out over the weekend in particular because we've seen, I think, a couple of these games on stream, maybe one other one for certain. And the teams that these trainers have been choosing to bring felt very, very standard and really going for consistency, most likely hoping to get those wins. But then yet still have the ability to stand out with Pokemon like Shedinja or Hydreigon. It's been a really fun series to follow.
Thing you kind of look at the whole team composition and you're like standard, and then there's just this wild card. You mentioned the Hydreigon, but I can see in there the Mienshao, the Gastrodon, the Pelipper, if I'm not mistaken, I can see in there as well. And there's a few really interesting choices as well with the Orangaroo. So it's really nice to kind of see these really kind of standard cores that you would be able to team build and prepare for, and then this absolutely rogue Pokemon thrown in that is possibly going to throw you off your game or be the one thing that's going to pivot out of victory.
Yeah, so let's take a look at these players going into this match. We'll start with Brian So from Singapore, running a very interesting team that Lunala, Incineroar, Tapu Koko, Araquanid, Amoonguss, and Stakataka. Really feeling very much like a team with the Tapu Koko there in order to provide some fast support once the Twisted Dimensions return to normal, which is really necessary in the format where it stands right now.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't see my face behind the camera here, but I was delighted to see the Lunala jumping into the fray here. Restricted we haven't really been able to see. It really is kind of a throwback to 2019 and the VGC seasons we had then. But this time we don't have to cope with any of those Z moves that are very complicated to say when it comes to Lunala. So it might be a little bit of easier commentating for us. But really nice to see this Pokemon paired up again with some great choices. That Tapu Koko, I'm interested to see what it's going to bring to the field because we're so used to seeing sort of in terms of terrain control, it tends to be the grassy terrain from like Rillaboom at the moment. But being able to bring in electric terrain and have that utility to stop your Pokemon from going to sleep can be advantageous. But then you have to watch out for the fact that you're paired up with an Amoonguss as well. You don't want to accidentally kind of put yourself on the back foot.
You do not. And John Paul Lopez from Peru on the opposite side of the field is also running a team that has a little bit of trick room there thrown in on the bottom with the Mimikyu and the Amoonguss, but otherwise is a interesting kind of team with Incineroar, Regieleki, and Tapu Lele for support.
Yeah, I really like again to see these combinations. There's a Regieleki, I'm really excited about it, but I promise I won't drone on about it for too much. Interesting to see the Mimikyu come back in, and like you said, there's kind of Trick Room utility on both these sides. It'd be interesting to see whether the players are going to lock in with those kind of speed modes, and then who's going to be the victor if that does indeed happen. Again, got to shout out that Tapu Lele. We've got the Alolan Guardians back in action here in this matchup.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a Tapu Koko and a Tapu Lele face off in a very long time. So that'll be really exciting to watch for this game. I think the other thing I want to keep an eye out for is really how Brian starts the game. A lot of times with Lunala teams, they'll be led with Lunala Incineroar or Lunala Amoonguss to allow you to either go on the offensive with Moongeist Beam or set up Trick Room. And depending on how Jean Paul leads into this game, I really want to see the adaptations that Brian will make to that lead. Because I think one thing that's really important to also keep an eye out for when watching Lunala battle is that your predictions have to be so on point. Because once Shadow Shield is gone, the Lunala is really going to be knocked out by one or two more hits pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make sure that that's preserved for as long as possible, and just to be able to deal the damage where you can before it obviously comes into effect. Again, really want to sort of kind of comment on the Occa Berry being on that opposing Amoonguss as well, because we've seen Amoonguss have a whole plethora of different items, most commonly to be there to combat a certain type of move. But having the Occa Berry there, is, really good information for us to have. So possibly when it comes down against this Incineroar, it might have some kind of utility defensively.
Honestly, I think I've seen Akaberry on every single Amoonguss I've casted over this weekend for Victory Road, which is the incredible metagame shift. I mean, it's not the first time that Amoonguss has held an Akaberry. You know, I talked a little bit about past formats where everything had hidden fire just for Amoonguss, so then obviously Amoonguss starts holding Akaberry, so that's no longer a problem. But to see it make a resurgence again, only because of Incineroar and Flare Blitz, and the fact that I mean, I'm looking at the matchup between Peru and Singapore this week right now. 100% of teams had Incineroar on them.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, so it's a very popular Pokemon, and it's not a surprise to see an item adjustment to respect it.
Yeah, and the item could very well come in handy, as there is an Incineroar on the opposing side for Jean-Paul, paired up with the Amoonguss, and the Amoonguss of Brian going to be paired up with the restricted Lunala here. So possibility for some really big damage here as well. Something like the Meteor Beam, particularly with the Power Herb, is going to deal huge damage to that opposing Incineroar. But then you have to watch out for any redirection.
And with Amoonguss on the field, I think that Jean-Paul has to keep an eye out for that redirection. Really, Brian as well. We saw him switch out the Amoonguss to Tapu Koko, which certainly would take a fire-type attack a little bit better than the Amoonguss, but it's a very passive lead for Jean-Paul to start this game out with, and I'm curious to see how he decides to play the Incineroar as a result. You know, we've seen a lot of trainers, Series 10 especially, start immediately by going for those parting shots on the Incineroar, but with Lunala right there, it must be very tempting to just go for that big damage and try and get an early advantage.
Yeah, Tapu Koko, the Alola champion, I saw there as its tag coming into the field. I'm going to set that electric terrain, stopping the opposing Amoonguss from going for a Spore to any effect. But instead, it is going to go for the Rage Powder. So going to be able to redirect in the attack from the Lunala, which is indeed going to be that Meteor Beam. Going to be obviously drawing in all of that cosmic energy and rocks ready for the big attack. Going to be boosting up its special attack and using its Power Herb as well to turn this 2-charge move into 1 turn. And even though the target you really want for this is going to be that Incineroar, it's still going to deal a decent chunk to this opposing Amoonguss, taking it to below 50%.
And parting shot from Incineroar as well with the follow-up, giving Jean-Paul the opportunity to switch out and switch something different onto the field. Usually when you see the Meteor Beam on Lunala, once they get that special attack boost up, they want to stay on the field, even though it's almost impossible for them to match up against a Pokemon like the Incineroar without having the 1-turn Rock-type move. So in this situation, the fact that Jean-Paul went for that rotation really does work out for Brian. He doesn't have that special attack boost anymore, but he has the ability to do a good chunk of damage to Kyogre immediately. We also got a little peek at that Tapu Koko as well to threaten the Amoonguss, and this will really start the game off on the right foot for him.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Amoonguss could always go for some redirection, draw in some electric type moves, but it looks like Tapu Koko could possibly have a combat for that. So the Amoonguss actually leaving the field, going to use its regenerate ability to regain some HP as the Incineroar comes into the field, going to be able to take this Brave Bird possibly a little better than that opposing Amoonguss would have been able to do. You can see it does minimal damage here, and Tapu Koko going to take some chip as well. Lunala going for the Amoonguss being to no avail. The Kyogre has indeed protected, but the one thing Jean-Paul has done is now switch things up, has the potential to go for that fake out into the Tapu Koko and protect the Kyogre in this turn.
Also gives us some good information about the Kyogre. If it has Protect, it most likely does not hold a Choice Scarf, which means Lunala and Tapu Koko should be faster than the Kyogre going into this turn. As a result, you have to use Fake Out to flinch that Tapu Koko to keep Kyogre safe.
Yes, exactly. Going into the Tapu Koko there, stopping it from going first. It looks like the Kyogre is actually outspeeding here. Going to be able to boost up its defenses here and the special attack due to the Calm Mind. As the Lunala goes for that Moongeist Beam, one of my favorite animations in the game here. Going to be able to go straight down into that Kyogre, but thanks to the boost, it's going to be able to take that much better than previously and regain a little bit of HP thanks to its leftovers. So we have got the item confirmation on that Kyogre.
That is a really wild set for Kyogre, but I like it. I mean, there's enough Pokemon on Jean Paul's side of the field that if there was something like a Regieleki to threaten that Kyogre, he could certainly take care of it. So, acknowledging the fact that the Kyogre, as a result, is going to have time to stay on the field for a couple of turns, will be able to recover its health with the leftovers, possibly even grassy terrain from an opposing Rillaboom. That is going to really change how this game moves forward. That Kyogre just became a huge threat.
Really nice play here from Brian as well. The Kyogre, we know it's threatening, but predicting it's going to go forward. Protect here in the face of Tapu Koko uses the opportunity to go for the Volt Switch and just pivot in on out of there, keeping the Tapu Koko safer for later on to maybe deal with that Kyogre. And it gives Brian the opportunity to bring in, either the Amoonguss or the Araquanid from the back. It just depends which Pokemon he thinks is going to be best suited in this situation. Araquanid obviously can utilize the weather and deal with the opposing Incineroar with sort of a nice water type move in this situation, while Lunala can go for those Moongeist beams. But thanks to the Calm Mind boost, the Moongeist beams are not going to be dealing as much, and you still need to find a way to hit that Kyogre on the physical side. Parting Shot is going to come out into the opposing Araquanid, so just as it joins the field, it's going to have to take an attack and special attack drop, which will of course be unfortunate for it here. But again, Jean-Paul able to go for the pivot.
And able to respond again first to Brian's switching of that Araquanid. I really like how Jean-Paul is playing the Incineroar in this matchup. We've been seeing it so much game after game after game. The Incineroar is coming out on the field using Parting Shot, coming back, using Fake Out on that one turn. It's been really sort of repetitive to see, but then to see how different trainers sort of incorporate that play style into their own, to, in this case, give the Kyogre the opportunity to go for Calm Mind, is really exciting. Now, Brian was able to successfully get Trick Room up in that past turn, and normally this would be a great opportunity for Araquanid to go on the offense, but because there is that Amoonguss on the opposing side of the field, Brian has to be very careful. Once the electric terrain runs out, that Araquanid will be threatened by being put to sleep by a Spore. It could take some big damage from a Giga Drain, or possibly, a decent amount of damage with Pollen Puff. As much as he must be happy to see the Twisted Dimensions, this is not quite the opportunity he was looking for yet.
Yeah, particularly with the Parting Shot, reducing the attacker, you can see why it possibly has switched out just to reset that. Lunala is going to have its Shadow Shield broken here from the Pollen Puff to cause doing minimal damage, but technically the damage has been done by kind of negating the effects of the ability. As Moongeist Beam comes out into that Kyogre, does deal still a decent chunk, but Kyogre in the rain with this Origin Pulse, finding its mark on both the opposing Pokemon, is certainly a better turn when you look at these two competitive players, really chunking away at that opposing Lunala. Amoonguss, however, not going to be able to do, not going to be able to take too much from that, and again, going to be able to enjoy this Trick Room environment.
I'm really curious to see how Brian's going to continue to play out this Trick Room. It almost feels like this Lunala is trapped on the field. Like, now that Trick Room has been set up, it's not going to be doing much damage with those Moongeist beams thanks to that Calm Mind, but on the other hand, you can't really switch in the Araquanid or the Tapu Koko at this point, and I mean, you can go for it certainly, but I feel like the risks of doing so would really just outweigh just keeping the Lunala on the field, consistently chunking away at the Kyogre until it is time for Trick Room to end and Tapu Koko to come back out onto the field. Jean-Paul, I think, has the opportunity to really capitalize on these Trick Room turns as a result of the positioning he has put together. So we'll see how he plans on doing that. Starts off with Kyogre and a Protect.
Yeah, particularly with the electric terrain leaving the field, Kyogre is vulnerable to potentially going to sleep. Lunala is going to have its HP recovered a little bit, though, by the Pollen Puff. And speaking of sleep, Lunala is now going to be able to take a nap. So, it has a little bit of R&R here. Gets a little bit of HP recovery. Not going to be able to do anything in this turn. I think you're right, though. Jean-Paul's got a great opportunity here to potentially, be in a position where you can start, going for some of those Calm Minds as well, just, boosting up your special defense and special attack, particularly in the face of Pokemon like Tapu Koko and the Lunala, but you have to worry about being put to sleep.
Yeah, and you can see why Brian's immediately going for that. The Kyogre just used its Protect in the previous turn, which means Jean-Paul either will maybe go for the double Protect, and you have a very low chance of actually getting that, or you'll just be forced to switch the Kyogre out, at which point you can put whatever comes in to sleep, or we can get some information about maybe where a safety goggles could be equipped on Jean Paul's team. or Kyogre stays on the field and tries to attack, at which point you put it to sleep. So the really nice thing about Amoonguss is that it's, especially when Trick Room is up, it's so slow. You can really easily bring it down to a 2v1 in any given turn, provided your opponent is vulnerable to that sleep.
Yeah, the Incineroar is going to switch in for Jean-Paul here as the Spore does indeed manage to connect down onto that opposing Kyogre. And I have to correct myself as well. We've had a little insight into that Tapu Koko. We know it has physical type moves, so it still will be able to deal with this Kyogre despite any Calm Mind. So Kyogre definitely not feeling very safe, particularly as it's taking a nap and leaving itself very vulnerable to any attacks. It has to make sure that it can pick up some KOs before it's KO'd in itself. And Jean-Paul bringing in the Incineroar now has the Fake Out utility on that opposing Amoonguss. But other than that, probably not a lot of action going down in this next turn if Pokemon want to sleep.
I mean, Lunala could decide to wake up, but you're absolutely right. If both these Pokemon stay asleep, we'll probably see, a flinch connect with the Amoonguss, and that'll be it. But it's a good opportunity for this Incineroar to force the Amoonguss off the field. I think the turn after, if we did see a flinch, but instead, Pollen Puff just heals that Lunala.
Yeah, really nice here, regaining all its HP, restoring the Shadow Shield here, as Parting Shot goes down into that opposing Lunala while it is still sleeping here. Just going to be able to reduce its special attack, but whether it can wake up at the end of the turn and deal some damage is still yet to be revealed. Of course, Jean-Paul, like you mentioned earlier, Gabby, we see the Incineroar just constantly going for this switching in and out and in and out. And it has that great utility and versatility to be able to do so, and it gives Jean-Paul the opportunity, as these Trick Room turns kind of dwindle down, to bring in a Pokemon from the back. Just to kind of allow the ball position to be in his favor when those turns do end.
Yeah, and I was expecting to see the Amoonguss come back out for a second, just because it would be an interesting threat if that Lunala had woken up this turn. But instead, we get confirmation of Jean-Paul's last Pokemon. It's Tapu Lele.
Yep, Tapu Lele making the battlefield all weird and wonderful. Kyogre is going to wake up, though, as the Lunala took another turn of sleep, going for that Calm Mind once again. And I think, although it's not so much about the defenses, as previously mentioned, boosting up your special attack, particularly when the rain isn't on the field, can certainly give Kyogre that advantage. When you've got those boosts from Calm Mind, you don't necessarily want to switch out your Pokemon if you can avoid it. But of course, Kyogre likes to be in the rain, so this is kind of a nice way to kind of counteract that.
It is quite nice. What isn't quite nice is how much danger this Amoonguss is in this turn. Tapu Lele, with Psychic Terrain especially, is one of the most powerful Psychic type attackers in the game. So Brian taking a huge risk, I think, in leaving the Amoonguss on the field, but Tapu Lele not targeting it.
Lunala going to be able to take that Shadow Ball really well, thanks to the shield being restored from Pollen Puff previously, but the Water Spout is going to be too much for it. It's going to be KO'd here from the double target, nothing it could do. And although the Amoonguss was able to avoid having to take a Psychic type move, it still has to take a significant chunk from the water damage here. Able to survive, of course, throwing a Spore back onto that Kyogre and saying, nope, go right back to sleep, please.
And this is the perfect opportunity for the Tapu Koko to take the field as well, as it will be faster than that Tapu Lele, and we do actually see it here in Team Preview holding an Assault Vest. It's curious to see that Brian decided to send in that Araquanid instead. It's possible he just wants to try and take advantage of the Kyogre's sleep turns. Since it is asleep, you don't necessarily have to bring that Tapu Koko out immediately to attack it. Instead, you can rely on the Araquanid and Amoonguss to target into that Lele, but it's a really interesting spot for both these trainers to be in, and it feels like Jean-Paul, honestly, if Brian has to keep switching around in order to get the opportunity to attack that Kyogre, I think that he'll be fine waiting for those sleep turns to run out and to finish this game thanks to another Water Spout.
Yeah, maybe just needing the Araquanid on the field so Tapu Koko could switch in later to override the terrain, obviously allowing the Amoonguss on Brian's side to use his regenerator ability, regain a little bit of HP, and just, take control of the terrain here as well with Tapu Koko back in the fray, going to stop Pokemon from going to sleep with the Amoonguss on Jean-Paul's side that has rejoined the field. Araquanid is going to go for the liquidation here, obviously would much rather be targeting down into that Tapu Lele, but still, just under a third to that opposing Amoonguss. And particularly as we know this Tapu Koko is running Brave Bird, Amoonguss certainly isn't safe here on the field.
No, and I think if you're Brian, you have to prioritize attacking into the Amoonguss, given how much trouble it could cause your team. Redirection is not going to help Brian, as he only has so many turns he can attack before Kyogre will just overpower the Pokemon on his side of the field. You also have to be very afraid about your Pokemon getting put to sleep once that electric terrain leaves the field again. So I like the double into the Amoonguss. It's possible that this Amoonguss is running a Protect, but even if that is revealed and Brian is unable to deal damage, I think that information will really help him play through the remainder of this game, but also the future games as well, as this Amoonguss is a key part of this pivoting strategy that Jean-Paul is running.
I mean, that's the thing. Amoonguss is so disruptive and annoying to deal with. If you're Brian, you want to just get rid of it at this stage. And even if it switches, the double target might be able to pick up a KO against it. I do like the switch, though, from Jean-Paul, bringing in the Incineroar, throwing down the Intimidate against both of these sort of confirmed physical attackers here. And Tapu Lele coming back in, again, really nice just to override the terrain and just stop any potential electric type moves from dealing any big damage. But it's going to be the Brave Bird, let's be honest, when it was targeting down against the opposing Amoonguss here, falling into the Tapu Lele, the Intimidate really paying off here, not going to be able to deal too much as the Araquanid follows up with the Liquidation down into Tapu Lele, and it is enough to pick up the KO despite the Intimidate. So one of the big sort of power hitters from Jean-Paul is going right back into his Pokeball, Gabby.
But the terrain is gone, and I think that's honestly the perfect opportunity for Jean-Paul to try and get the Amoonguss back out onto the field and to go for those spores. I mean, you have to wonder how much this Intimidate is going to matter here, given that we saw how much damage Brave Bird did to the Tapu Lele. It's possible that after an Intimidate, it's not enough to knock out the Amoonguss outright. But the Amoonguss could take this opportunity to spore either of the Pokemon. You know, if Jean-Paul is expecting the Tapu Koko to leave the field to try and get terrain back, you go for the spore to that slot. Otherwise, you can target the Araquanid and remove one of the bigger threats that Brian has remaining. At the end of the day, especially if these Intimidates continue to come out on the field from Jean-Paul, it's going to be the Araquanid that Brian is going to have to look to deal damage and to win this game, given its advantageous typing. So keeping it safe here is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And the Protect coming out there on the Araquanid. Tapu Koko, I think, wisely going for the Protect, the Volt Switch here, allowing Brian to pivot and bring that terrain back into effect with the electric terrain. You don't have to worry about those sleeps that you were talking about, Gabby, there. But of course, you have to protect the Araquanid in this situation when the terrain's not in play. Brian is going to bring in the Amoonguss of his own here. You know, it's had its HP recovered a little bit, but still only at 50% here, as the Parting Shot isn't failing to be able to remove that Incineroar from the field.
And it looks like a Spore fails to put the Amoonguss asleep as well. So really a good turn for both these trainers, both getting a little bit of something that they wanted. I think that the fact that the Amoonguss on Brian's side of the field is at such low health, it means that this is the perfect opportunity for Jean-Paul to try and attack into it. Probably not with the Incineroar. I think you have to keep that super safe, knowing how important Intimidate is now for the rest of your team. But, you know, definitely a Pollen Puff or two from the opposing Amoonguss will continue to keep that Amoonguss at a higher health. And it's curious to me to figure out who's going to get down to 2 Pokemon first, because given the fact that these trainers are down to their last 3 Pokemon, we're still seeing a lot of switch from both sides of the field. And as a result, whoever loses that critical next Pokemon is going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it certainly is turning into a very long game one. You saw the 3-minute timer flash up on the screen there. Like you said, a lot of switching, a lot of defensive plays here. As Tapu Koko rejoins the field and resets that terrain. Amoonguss is going to go for the Rage Powder, but of course to no avail here. Tapu Koko switching in, and Amoonguss doesn't care about that, to be honest. It is going to have the Occa Berry popped, though, by the Flare Blitz coming out from that opposing Incineroar. So again, some good information for Jean-Paul. And Amoonguss is going to be able to survive. So great item choice on here. Going to be able to take that attack really nicely and go for the Grass Knot. Really not going to deal too much damage, but, you know, every little bit of chip can be helpful.
And would have caught that Kyogre by a nasty surprise had Jean-Paul used Parting Shot on the Incineroar that turn. So, you know, really a good prediction from Brian's part. Unfortunately, Jean-Paul was just one step ahead of him with that Flare Blitz. And as a result, you know, Brian gonna be forced to switch the Amoonguss out again just to ensure that Regenerator is giving him his health back. Because at this point in time, the timeout at the end of the game is very, very likely. And every single HP point matters in that tiebreaker calculation.
That's very true. You need to be thinking about those end game win conditions. And like you said, every HP really does matter. Tapu Koko is going to go for the wild charge. Not going to deal too much to the Amoonguss, but of course has to watch out for the recoil it takes as well in those sort of HP calculations at the end. Instead, we're all going to go for the Flare Blitz into the Tapu Koko. That's certainly going to deal a huge chunk of damage again, not picking up the KO, dealing a little bit of recoil. These Pokemon really are hanging on towards this end game, Gabby.
They are, and it looks like we're seeing Brian go for a fairly big move in what could be the final turn of this game. At this point, it really depends on how long Paul stalls out his move selection. He's been doing a fairly good job of, using the maximum time consistently throughout this game, which I think has been really a smart thing to do, knowing that it is reaching this timer as a possible win condition for him. So if he's able to hold on to all three of his Pokemon and Brian, gets a Pokemon knocked out here as a result of going for these big attacks, that'll guarantee him the win. It's possible that, he also has a way to just protect these Pokemon. Maybe a Rage Powder will be enough to redirect and, make sure he's still in the lead.
Yeah, final seconds ticking down here. Brave Bird is going to come out from Tapu Koko, and this time finally find his mark on that opposing Amoonguss, but not going to be enough to pick up the KO against it, and actually KO the Tapu Koko in recoil here. So one Pokemon down for Brian as Incineroar goes for the parting shot. It's going to find its mark onto that opposing Araquanid, going to be reducing its attack here, allowing John Paul the opportunity to pivot one last time in this game one. But I wonder what the Araquanid is going to go for here, which Pokemon it is deciding to target down. It needs to find a way to pick up a KO, possibly doubling up into that opposing Amoonguss. So even if the Brave Bird had been able to pick up the KO against it, the move would just be redirected around. Kyogre is joining the field here, going to be resetting this range just as the battle is going to end. Araquanid, it's really down to you.
It is, and that liquidation is going to find its mark on the Amoonguss for the knockout. So both these trainers will be ending this game with 2 Pokemon. It just comes down to how much health is left on both sides of the field.
Well, Kyogre looking really healthy at full HP. I think the Araquanid, again, at full HP. It's going to be the Amoonguss coming in here for Brian. I wonder how much that Regenerator has given it. These calculations can all help. Oh, 88 HP there. Of course, it's all done on the percentages as well, not actually necessarily the number. And it's going to be close, Gabby.
Yeah, it's like 120 on John's side of the field versus like 40, and the Araquanid's I think the Araquanid's just a sliver lower than 100%, but overall that final switch into the Amoonguss was enough to ensure that Brian had the win, and that was just some crazy good just oversight of the field, and making sure that the Pokemon that were remaining in that situation were the ones that had the higher amount of health. Like going into game 2, part of me can't help but wonder if these trainers are going to follow a similar slow play game, or if we're going to see, some more offensive plays. I think that we saw a really solid performance from Brian's team, but Jean-Paul was playing very passively throughout that game. And with Pokemon like Regieleki and that Kyogre with those Calm Minds and Water Spout, I would assume that there's a lot more damage that could come from his side of the field if he decides to make that aggressive adjustment.
Yeah, that's the thing. Jean-Paul's got some really strong, powerful Pokemon on that side. We saw the Tapu Lele do some good damage as well. If it was able to be in a position where it was less vulnerable, like we saw in game 1, it can certainly do some big damage to something like the Amoonguss. And again, in terrain against the Tapu Koko with something like a Psychic, we've seen do devastating damage in the past. But that Assault Vest could easily come into effect in those calculations. You've got to remember as well, this is the deciding match between these two countries at the minute. They're neck and neck. So the pressure is sort of insurmountable here with these two players.
It is, and I would be very curious to wonder what's going on in both these trainers' heads as they go through this team preview. Brian is locking in the same Pokemon he used in game 1, which I think is a good indication that these are just the best Pokemon for this matchup for him. And I really love how he also went with, I believe, the Lunala again on his side of the field, since that does give him the opportunity to make an adjustment immediately from what we saw in game 1 where he went for Meteor Beam. He could simply go for a Rage Powder and a Trick Room if it wasn't for the fact that Tapu Lele and Kyogre have some nice spread move access that he could utilize.
Yeah, exactly. The spread moves could be the downfall here. Again, you kind of have the nice utility of going for something like a Rage Powder here if they do want to go for their single target moves, but then Amoonguss does not want to accidentally draw in any of these psychic type moves. Lunala at least has the advantage of being able to, quite nicely remove a Tapu Lele from the field with something like a Moongeist Beam, but then Kyogre is free to start setting up those Calm Mines.
Yeah, and I'm really curious how Jean-Paul is going to prioritize this here because we saw him save the Tapu Lele for the late game in game one, whereas now he's leading it immediately. I'm wondering if he's going to try and get the Lunala off the field turn one, but instead it looks like it's the Amoonguss that's going to be taking a ton of damage.
Poor Amoonguss removed from the field. I mean, it was such a pesky Pokemon in game one. I can see why Jean-Paul wants to remove it, but straight out the bat with that Side Shock, as the Water Spout is not going to be able to do any damage to that opposing Lunala. Do we have the kind of a scope on what this Tapu Lele is running? Is it something like a Scarf, maybe?
It could be, yeah. I mean, that Tapu Lele was very fast, but also that Psyshock was pretty powerful. I think that normally Tapu Lele can outspeed the Lunala without the Choice Scarf. I can double check that stat real quick, but definitely an indication that this Tapu Lele is trained to be on the offense rather than the defense.
Yeah, definitely huge damage coming out from that Side Shock. And now it really is up to Brian to try and regain some momentum here. Tapu Lele picking up a strong KO, and you don't have the utility to have that Amoonguss with the Trick Room option with the Lunala. And, having your Tapu Koko on the field, it's nice. It can override the terrain, stop those Side Shocks from being as devastating as we've just seen, and obviously can apply some really good pressure to that opposing Kyogre too.
Yeah, it's a tough call to make in regards to the Tapu Lele's held item, as Lunala has a base 97 speed, Tapu Lele has base 95. But, Lunala tends to be slower and bulkier, and Tapu Lele, especially in the Series 10 metagame when they do make an appearance, tend to be very speedy, regardless of what item they're holding. But that switch out there is a good indication that whatever it is, choice specs, choice scarf, it's choice something.
Yeah, definitely potentially a choice item. And obviously, you want to reset that terrain a little bit later on in the game. Wild Charge being revealed from the Tapu Koko hit into the opposing Kyogre that quite wisely protected. Meteor Beam, however, is going to come out from this opposing Lunala, obviously going to be boosting itself up, plus one special attack. Power Herb activation. Is it going down into the supposing Incineroar? Is it going into the Protect? It is into the Incineroar. It's find its mark. This is what it failed to do in game one. Just removes Incineroar from the play. Again, another Pokemon that is just so difficult to deal with if it keeps switching in and out. And those intimidates against the Pokemon such as the Tapu Koko and the Araquanid certainly were difficult for Brian to maneuver around in the previous game. So now you don't have to worry about that so much.
Yeah, and Brian will probably switch the Tapu Koko out this turn regardless, just because the Tapu Lele will be coming out on the field for Jean-Paul. So you can easily get rid of that Intimidate. You can use the Lunala at this point in time to target down either the Kyogre to weaken the Water Spout damage or the Tapu Lele to from the field. And then you can go ahead and bring the Tapu Koko out again afterwards. It's a very good position for both these trainers to be in. If you think about it, they went for the most annoying Pokemon on the opposing side of the field as the first knockout, the Amoonguss and the Incineroar. So because of that, it feels like they're still sort of matched up, though I will say, I think the Amoonguss on Jean-Paul's side of the field is a bit more scary than the Araquanid on Brian's side.
Yeah, very true, particularly if Tapu Lele can get control of the terrain and let those spores fly free. Shadow Ball's going to come out from Tapu Lele into the protect of that Lunala, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Tapu Koko switching in on out of here. Yes, going to do a little bit of chip damage to that Tapu Lele, but resetting the Intimidate and also going to be resetting the terrain when it joins the action later on in this match, I think is going to be advantageous. And bringing in the Araquanid to not only benefit from the rain, but the fact that there's no Incineroar anymore. It doesn't have to worry about being intimidated and can go for some big damage into that opposing Tapu Lele. Kyogre, however, going to go for the Origin Pulse, protect, really wise once again on this Lunala, and the Araquanid's not going to worry too much about taking one of these.
No, Araquanid is a water-type Pokemon, so it's not going to be very effective at all, and it's great to see the Araquanid on the field at this point, too, because it's really the perfect Pokemon to target down Tapu Lele for Brian. Also, possibly that Kyogre later on, but it's a fun Pokemon in Series 10 because it gets access to a lot of different utility options, and Wide Guard is certainly one of them.
Absolutely love this. Going to block those Origin Pulses, and Tapu Lele going for the Shadow Ball. We know with the Shadow Shield intact on that Lunala, it's going to be able to take one of these and then can fire off a powerful Moongeist Beam into the opposing Tapu Lele and remove it from the field with Araquanid providing the wide guard support. So you don't have to worry about the Kyogre in this particular turn. Lunala able to jump up to the sky and go for that Moongeist Beam and just pick up a KO against Tapu Lele if that is indeed the target.
It has to be at this point, since Tapu Lele is the Pokemon that is the scariest for Brian. He has Wide Guard to stop Kyogre's attacks. You know, we've seen all four of them. We've seen the Protect, we've seen Calm Mind, we've seen Water Spout and Origin Pulse. There is no way this Kyogre can deal any damage to the Lunala, provided the Araquanid keeps going for the Wide Guard on Brian's side of the field. The unfortunate thing is that the Amoonguss should have the opportunity to connect a Spore with that Araquanid unless Brian switches in the Tapu Koko. He has to do a switch here because he can't rely on Protect after Wide Guard, as it's not guaranteed to succeed. So getting the terrain up is the safest way to keep Araquanid safe. You use that Wide Guard to make sure that you don't take any damage. And then next turn, you're able to focus in on the Amoonguss for a knockout thanks to Brave Bird.
Honestly, yeah, you've completely flowcharted it out there. Fantastic. The Wide Guard able just to stop that Kyogre in its tracks. Very well calculated with the 4 moves. We know that that Kyogre cannot do anything to Brian's side while that Araquanid stays in play. As you can see here, Tapu Koko doesn't have to worry about this Amoonguss. There's really not a lot that it can do to it, particularly with the electric terrain in play. And then can just go for those powerful Brave Birds, even if it has to take something like a Pollen Puff or something from the opposing Amoonguss. It's not going to worry about taking 1 or 2 of those at this stage, and it can just go for those Brave Birds, and then Kyogre is going to have to deal with the Tapu Koko and the Lunala once the Amoonguss has been dealt with.
And it's going to be almost impossible for the Kyogre to handle those Pokemon. Just again, because of that Wide Guard. I love how Brian saved that for this game too. There were a couple opportunities where Araquanid was on the field opposite Kyogre back in game 1, but very smartly just keeping it a secret from his opponent. And Jean-Paul now just playing to his only win condition. That's going to be stalling out the electric terrain.
Yeah, exactly. You want to try and stall it out. You can see the double protector on the opposing side. I mean, again, if you're Brian, you have the utility. Even if electric terrain does run out, you can easily protect your Araquanid and go for a switch. And, you know, bring in the Lunala, bring the Tapu Koko back in. But then again, you run the risk of maybe accidentally being caught on a Spore while the electric terrain's not in play. But Araquanid just going to go straight for the Wide Guard here. Once again, no reason to not click that move when it is a very solid win condition, as Tapu Koko goes for the Brave Bird. This time with no Intimidate on it. Not going to be able to pick up the KO against Amoonguss, though. Is going to need 1 more of those, but certainly is within range. And Kyogre just useless here to deal any damage. I just feel so sorry for it at the moment.
Jean-Paul does have the opportunity to protect again next turn, and after that, we'll have the opportunity to roll for a double protect on Amoonguss, and if that works out, then I think this Amoonguss will have stalled out the remainder of the electric terrain. The only downside to that plan is the amount of damage Amoonguss took from the Brave Bird, from the Tapu Koko, was over half, and I don't think this Amoonguss has access to any more recovery at this point. You know, we haven't seen the reveal of a Giga Drain or anything, and given that Jean-Paul did just lock in a forfeit, I think that he just didn't have the tools he needed to win the game at that point. And unfortunately for Peru, Singapore is going to be moving on to the top 8.
Yeah, I mean, huge congratulations to Singapore, and what a dynamic game 2 in comparison to game 1, where it really was that kind of slow and steady race. And then in game 2, it was just KO, KO, KO. And I think, like you said, they really wanted to remove the pesky Pokemons from the opposing side with the Incineroar and the Amoonguss, and then just leave those big, heavy, offensive Pokemon in the fray to then deal huge damage and pick up big KOs left, right, and center. But, you know, huge congratulations to both of our players. It certainly was a really enjoyable match, and we've had our deciding match of this particular sort of country clash.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see how Singapore is going to continue on into the next week, given how close this week was for both of them. You know, Peru really made them work for that advancement, and I'm hoping that they take the energy and sort of let it roll forward, similar to how you monitor momentum on the field, so that we get some really exciting matches like these ones next week.
Exactly. And of course, the exciting matches don't stop here. You can see Gimli has now woken up. He's ready to join the stream. And I think that means it's time for me to leave the desk and throw over to my fellow casters so we can sit back and enjoy all the action. So a very quick break coming up, but then we'll be back for our final 2 matches very soon.